happy you've chosen to join us this morning. Today's session, as I've said, is being offered in both English and in French. So if you would like to change the language you're listening to, you can do so at the bottom of your screen on the languages button. You can scroll up and click either English or French, whichever you prefer to listen to today. Before we get into our session, I would love to welcome Dr. Stanley Wilson here this morning to say some opening words. So Stanley, over to you.
Nancy, to Timothy, Tamaskat now, Esi Pape, work Minesi Mamawet. Good morning, bonjour. Greetings to all of you individually as well as all of you collectively. I think we could start by thanking the Creator, Kisemantu, that for our health and the health of all our relations, and to give thanks for the blessings that we enjoy. And this time also to bless those people who are not in good health and ask the Creator to help them get well soon so they can enjoy a healthy life as well. And also we ask the Creator to bless those people who are suffering from anguish and from grief of loss of loved ones, like we have here today. We lost one of our elders, and we give thanks for the benefits that we received from his knowledge and wisdom. And at this time, we ask the Creator to guide us in our thinking and doing in the work that we are involved in trying to help our communities, our First Nations, to become better communities in the future, so that our young people, our youth will benefit from the work that we are engaged in. And we ask the Creator to help this and bless us in this work. Excuse me. And this time we asked someone to help us do our work with a good heart and a good mind. Hegusi, hi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson. Thank you for being here this morning, and thank you for those words and for getting us started in a good way. Welcome again, everybody. My name is Kate Davis, and I'm speaking to you today from my home on the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I'm a planner at Alderhill Planning, and I'm just really excited to be here today. We have almost 40 people joining us, which is great. So really nice to see so many people here this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're calling from. I'm joined today by my team, Felicia Fisher, Phaedra Jenner, and Ren Roberts. If you need any assistance during the session, please send any of us a message and we'll help you sort out any tech challenges. We'll do our best. So welcome to the CCP Virtual Speaker Series. This is a national virtual learning series with the intent of offering a virtual space for community planners to learn together and to connect, especially during this time when it's been really challenging to do so. And I think we're all really missing that. So trying to offer some space to create that as best we can in this virtual world. Today's session of this series is focused on virtual facilitation and engagement for CCP. And in just a few minutes, I'll invite Jessie Hemphill to give a presentation on that. This is the first of 2 sessions we're going to host before the new year. Next week at the same time on Tuesday, we're hosting a session on land-based healing. Felicia, if you could please post the registration link for that. If you're not registered and you would like to join, we would love to see you here again next week. And again, a reminder that today's session is hosted in both English and French. We are super happy to have Caroline and Francois here as our interpreters today. So you can go to the language button at the bottom of your Zoom and choose which language you want to listen to today. So in just a few minutes, we'll hear from Jessie, who will be giving us a presentation on virtual facilitation and engagement. Following Jessie's presentation, we're going to divide up into breakout rooms so that we can have discussion in smaller groups and more of a chance to connect and chat together outside of this larger room. So if you would like to join a French language breakout room, I'm going to ask that you put an FR at the beginning of your Zoom name now, so that we can make sure that you go into a French speaking breakout room. We won't have interpretation in the breakout rooms themselves. And if you have any trouble changing your name, let myself or Felicia know, and we can help you with that before we go into breakout rooms. After breakout rooms, we'll all come back to the main room and we'll have time for just a few questions for Jessie. So while you're in the rooms, if there's a question from the group, you can decide on 1 or 2 questions to ask, and then the floor is yours when we get back. And finally, I just wanted to say a really big thank you to Indigenous Services Canada, Manitoba region, especially Val and Angel, who sponsored and supported this series for all of us today. I also want to thank Victoria Laughlin for your help and your support, and Dr. Stanley for your opening words. And finally, to Catherine Béland, who helped with a lot of French translation, and Caroline and Francois for our interpretation support. So again, welcome. Very nice to see you all. And I'm going to hand it over to Jessie Hemphill.
Gela kisla nuku amklali logula. Kan la knakwatau tlu likwitau tlu meiti. Gela kisla snanemuch. Gela kisla ninogad tlu omaski kame Good morning, everyone. I'm Jessie Hemphill. I just shared with you in my own language that my name is Tlali Logula, and I come from the Nakotau and Likwitau peoples of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation here on the coast of what we now call British Columbia. And I also have Métis heritage from the Marion family in the area we now call Winnipeg. And I live in the unceded ancestral territory of the Snuneymuxw Nation, where I'm joining you from today. And it is gray and rainy outside and like perfect weather to be cozy here in my office, joining all of you for this brief presentation. So thank you for being here. I use she, her pronouns, and I also, in my opening comments, just acknowledged our elder, Dr. Wilson, for opening the gathering, and also acknowledge the creator. So thank you all. I'm really excited to talk about virtual engagement and facilitation training. And we have some slides, but I think I'm going to do a lot of storytelling in this short time that we have together. And so the first story that I wanted to share with you was just like a story of maybe solidarity about the learning curve that happened in the last 2 years. I was reminded yesterday that just over almost 2 years ago now, at the beginning of 2020, I am somebody that likes to think a lot about the future. I've been planning for over 10 years now, doing Indigenous planning. I worked with my own community. I've had the pleasure of working with Indigenous communities across Canada. And as a planner, I'm always thinking about the future, how to get ready for what's coming next. And starting in like Christmas of 2019, I have a daughter who was just about 6 months at that time, and we were on the road for work a lot. And I noticed that it was getting really hard to buy antiseptic wipes on Amazon for taking her out to eat on the ferry and stuff. And I went, that's a little strange. And then I started learning more about coronavirus, which hadn't come here yet. And went, okay, as a planner, we need to think about this. And so in January 2020, months before most folks in my world were taking it, saw it coming, I sat down with our team at Alderhill and said, we need to all make sure we have Zoom accounts, and we need to think about virtual facilitation and engagement, because my prediction is that within a few months, we're not going to be able to do in-person meetings anymore. And kudos to the team who were like, okay, we're all going to get Zoom accounts. We're all going to get experience in how to do virtual engagement and facilitation, and let's see what happens. And I stopped doing in-person meetings in December of 2019. And my first in-person facilitation is actually coming up tomorrow. So it's been almost 2 years of almost entirely virtual engagement and facilitation, along with our team of a couple dozen of us at Alderhill who've been doing virtual engagement. So I'm going to share with you today some tips we've picked up along the way for how to do virtual engagement, knowing that at the end of the day, nothing feels as good as being in the same room as people you care about, people you love, and having those conversations. Nothing replaces that. But at the same time, we can do the best we can to make the good use of the tools that are available to us. And for some people, including the off reserve members in my community, sometimes the virtual facilitation at least gives them a connection that they would never have, even if it's not quite as good as a meal with elders in the community. So just before I get into my slides, I also just wanted to acknowledge that, as Kate said, we've got 37 folks in the call right now, and you're all coming here with very different homes, coming from different places across the country. You're coming with different levels of experience and probably with different questions, as well as your own stories, your own tips to share. So I thought that maybe just to start, if you don't mind, in the Zoom chat, I would love it if folks could share where you're joining from today, and then whether you have a big question or something related to virtual facilitation that you're really hoping I'm going to talk about. So where are you joining from today? And what's a big question or topic you really hope we cover today? And I'm going to give just a minute for folks to share those in the Zoom chat and maybe read a couple out loud. As Kate said, you'll have more time in the breakouts to get into that, but just so as I go through these slides, I can weave in your questions. Thanks, Julie. Julie's joining from the traditional unceded territory of the Lheidli Dene. Julie from Quebec. Let a few more of those roll in and then see if there's any questions. Again, if you have any questions or specific topics you want me to cover, I can do so. Maybe we'll jump ahead to slide 2, Ren. So these are kind of the 4 big things we're going to talk about in the next half hour. I've already kind of introduced myself. I'm going to move next into a little bit of Community Engagement 101. Community Engagement 101, just some general principles, whether you're facilitating in person or online. I'm going to talk a little bit very briefly about creating an agenda, and then try and spend a good chunk of time, like at least 15 minutes maybe, for focusing on tips for virtual engagement. I also see a couple questions or areas of focus coming in the chat. So Linda said, sometimes it's difficult to get people to engage and turn cameras on. So we could talk about some ideas for that. And Sharon has shared a question would be around virtual engagement with communities that are more rural, remote, with less than ideal connectivity. Yeah, we can definitely talk about that, about the tech aspect of it. Those are the only 2 I see now. So why don't we dive right into Community Engagement 101? maybe we'll just hang out on slide 4 for a minute, Ren. And just remind folks that when we're doing comprehensive community plans or CCPs, nothing is more important in the CCP process than community engagement. It doesn't matter how brilliant of a planner you are, what's happening in the community in terms of economic development or policy, all those areas are important too. But at the end of the day, the thing that makes CCP special is the level of community engagement that happens in this planning work and the efforts put towards engaging everyone from little kids to everyone in the middle to elders, on officer, folks that are married in. Community engagement part of the CCP usually takes 1 to 3 years, And so that's partly why we've got this topic today, because it's such an important part of CCP and it's been such a challenge for folks in the last couple of years. I also want to quickly just mention that when we're thinking about comprehensive community planning, as opposed to really technical plans, a CCP is really the place for the community to express their values, to express their high level, their vision for the future. It doesn't need to be full of really technical details that staff can provide later on in other plans. So I'm going to try and focus a little bit about or on how to engage people in talking about values and talking about vision specifically. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to look at a couple helpful diagrams just for thinking about community engagement. And I also see in chat we've had a couple more comments. And so tips on how to encourage people to try online if they're intimidated. And then another one about getting folks engaged through virtual portals from Sarah McLaughlin. So maybe Sarah, if you've got more detail about your virtual portals, you could share that because I'm unfamiliar. But going back to the slides. So again, these are just general diagrams that are helpful. This is something called the spectrum of public participation. And this was actually developed by the International Association of Public Participation, or IAP2, really incredible organization with lots of tricks and tools for engagement. So IAP2, and they created this spectrum, which says that there are lots of different ways that we can engage community members. And one way of thinking about those different ways is thinking about how much power we as the facilitators, as the planners, are giving to community members in the engagement we're doing. How much power? So this spectrum is really about power. And we know that with a CCP, we want to give community members as much power as possible to shape that vision, shape that those goals, pardon me. And so the spectrum starts at the lowest amount of power given to community. When we don't give the community very much power at all, we're generally informing them. And that's like a one-way flow of information. We control the message, we control the images, we're just informing the community, but they don't have much of a voice. And so often when we're just starting a CCP, we'll do a lot of informing activities just to get people up to speed and get them ready to engage. And so informing engagement activities are things like newsletters, notices, posts on websites or social media, posters around the community, phone calls just to give people a heads up about upcoming meetings. Those are all informing activities. So they are important, but they don't make people feel empowered. And again, you'll probably do a lot of those at the beginning. When we move up the spectrum and give people a little bit more power, we get into activities that are consulting, where we still have a lot of power. We're creating the questions. And I see your question, Terry. I believe the PowerPoint is going to be shared. Yeah, and as well as the recording. I think, Kate, maybe you can mention in chat whether people need to take notes or not. Yeah, it will all be sent out, Terry. So when we get into consulting, you still have a lot of power. You write the questions, you sort of scope the conversation. And here we see activities like questionnaires and maybe presentations with Q&A, like I'm doing today. You might notice today that you're feeling, especially if you have a lot of experience in this area, like you don't have a lot of room to participate and give your own thoughts. It's really like, I have the power in this meeting. And so again, that might be okay at the beginning of a CCP, but you want to be moving up the spectrum and away from just consulting as we get deeper into engagement for a CCP. Then we get into activities that involve community members and even better collaborate with them, where they have a lot of power and their voices shape the whole process. And here we see things like advisory groups, activities, or meeting agendas that you develop with the community themselves, where you write the questions together, you figure out the engagement approach together. And then at the highest, well, I guess in this image, the lowest, but the most power on the spectrum comes in activities or engagement that empowers community members. And so a CCP, when you really hand over the reins to the community and say, what is your vision? What are your goals? We're going to write down exactly what community members want in our CCP. That's really at its ultimate level, deeply empowering for community members to see their voices translated into a plan that leadership and staff then carry forward in all their activities. So again, the spectrum is just a helpful way of thinking about all the different engagement activities we do and thinking about power and trying always to give more and more power over to community members in this process. Let's go to the next image. And I'm seeing more questions about, being connected to the internet, memory sticks with internet sources to use for meetings, some good tech questions. Brenda, I'm not surprised you would have an excellent tech question. So again, I'll try and weave these in as we go along, or else get to the ones at the end that I miss. Okay, so we talked about the spectrum of engagement, which makes us think about power and how much power we're giving to people. But another helpful model that I've developed is something I call planning for joy. And the idea here is that, yes, you want to give people lots of power in a planning process, but in order to encourage them to participate, we need to make the work that we're doing feel good. We need to bring joy into our engagement and planning work. That's the only way that this work will be sustainable and keep people interested in the long haul. And so planning for joy, it also gives ourselves permission as the CCP coordinators or facilitators to do things in a way that makes us happy, that feels playful and feels good in our bodies. And so planning for joy says, if we're going to have a meeting, we should make sure that we feed people really well. We should try and make sure that the space we're in is beautiful. Today, you can see that my background, which is a picture of the Nakutau village bass, I chose this because it brings me joy. It makes me remember where I come from and remember the strength of my ancestors. And so, and also hopefully it gives you something kind of interesting to look at, especially if you're not from the coast, like this is where I come from. So even in this virtual environment, we can find these little ways to bring joy to the space. You know, the Zoom filters, like where you put on funny sunglasses or dog ears or whatever, like all these little things. There's a real space for play in our community engagement. It doesn't have to be so serious all the time. And we can still do good work. And so again, in person, that looks like food, child minding, good prizes, music. But in a virtual setting, that could still look like music, nice backgrounds, giving people good breaks, having good energizers, thinking about the tone of your voice and being kind, thinking about games that you can get people involved in, using visual tools, some other things we're going to talk about later. Let's go to the next slide. So planning for joy. I'm going to move through these next two quickly, although there's a lot of information here. Another thing that we like to think about when planning engagement is nested systems, which is just many of our communities have these systems which say that the self is nested in the family or the household. My family is nested within the community, and my community is nested within the land and maybe the cosmos. And so in order to do good engagement, I need to think about how I'm showing up and taking care of myself so that I'm in a good space to take care of other people. And what nested systems also tells us is that we create ripple effects. So even though we might not be able to change everything in the community all at once, if our big goal is to support people's health and well-being, well, how can we do that in our one little meeting? Maybe that's like leaving extra space for breaks, or giving people, encouraging them to drink lots of water. Or maybe it's like little physical activities woven into our meeting. So right in the small actions, we can create those ripple effects that might in the end translate to bigger shifts in the community. So starting small is okay. Let's actually skip the next diagram and go right down into creating an agenda. So again, those are just a few different models to keep in the back of our mind when we're planning engagement, thinking about power, thinking about joy, and thinking about the little things we can do that create those big ripple effects. Now, we can think about how those translate into an agenda. I'm just going to spend a moment here before we go to talking about virtual specifically. Let's go to the next image, the next slide. So when we create an agenda for virtual engagement, we for sure want to think about the topics that we want to address. And in a CCP, it might look like housing, like we want to talk to the community about housing, or lands, or economy, or education, or governance, or health, or social issues, you know, all those elements of the CCP. We might have a really good idea of the topics that we want to talk to people about, but it's really important when we're planning a community CCP meeting for virtual or in person that we think beyond topics into the outcomes. What are the outcomes we want for each topic? And then what activity or activities is going to best support our group to get their desired outcome? And so let's go to the next slide. I think this is so helpful. So you should always be trying to think about your meeting goals. And there's 7 here, and these come from a book called Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making by Sam Kaner, which I love so much. It's such a handy book. Really recommend it. But he says there's 7 main types of meeting goals. And before you plan engagement, you better figure out what exactly you're trying to do. So number 1, are you trying to just share information? Number 2, are you trying to advance the thinking of the group? Like thinking about a challenge and trying to brainstorm how to move past it. Is your goal just to get input? So maybe you've got a draft CCP and you want community members to comment on your draft CCP. Or is your meeting goal to make a decision? So maybe you have 2 versions of a vision statement and you want the community to choose the final version of the vision statement. You want to make a decision. Maybe you just want to improve communication. You want to talk about talking and figure out what would help people engage better and take that direction and apply it. And then the last 2 are maybe you want to build capacity. That's what we're doing here today. This is a capacity building gathering where I'm sharing some tips. You're going to share your own, and hopefully we all walk away with some new skills, new knowledge, and maybe new connections. And then finally, building community is absolutely a meeting goal, just an informal community dinner or maybe drop in like social session on Zoom. It's totally fine, especially in CCP, to do community engagement that's just about giving people informal space to connect. So again, when you're planning engagement, thinking about what your goals are and what activities are going to help you achieve these goals. Let's go to the next slide. This is just a little example of how we do a simple agenda, just time, topic, and then facilitators' notes on the specific activity that we're going to use to cover each topic. Let's go to the next one. So now we're going to get into tips for virtual engagement. And I've got just about 15 minutes left. I'm going to share some best practices that we've learned, and then I'm going to go back through the chat and look at the questions that you shared and try and answer some of them and invite your answers as well. So again, here at Alderhill, we've been doing all virtual engagement for about 2 years now. I would say my biggest gathering was maybe 500 people. And I've, been in, like 100 Zoom meetings with just a couple people. So some CCP meetings, my own nation right now is doing a CCP update, and it's been all virtual engagement so far. And so we've got a handful of tips here for you. The next one, or the first A big tip around setting up for virtual engagement is around team composition. So who needs to do what to do a good virtual meeting? We'll go to the next slide, Ren. And in our experience, you need, I would say, at least 2 people, but 3 or 4 is even better. And so bare minimum, you need a lead facilitator, which right now would be me, right? A lead facilitator, someone to pay attention to people in the Zoom room and keep the conversation going. And then you also need a tech host. So that's what Kate and Ren and Felicia are doing right now. The bigger you're gathering, the more supports you need. So for a smaller meeting, you could have the lead facilitator and maybe a tech host who can also take some notes. Ideally, you would have a separate note taker so the tech host can focus on helping people get online, maybe phoning them if they get kicked out of the meeting or have audio issues, while the note taker can continue to take notes. If you can't get a note taker and you have the consent of the group, you can also record the meeting and take notes from that later. So like I say, bare minimum 2 people, but ideally at least 3. And then sometimes you also need additional support. So today we've got 2 translators, right? Because it's multilingual, so we need those additional supports. I was at a workshop recently where we tried to make it very accessible. And so we had American Sign Language interpreters as additional supports throughout the whole workshop. So thinking about all these different roles and making sure I would say there is really no way that a single individual can run a really good virtual session for a community CCP event. There are too many moving parts when you're screen sharing and live streaming and all these different things. So don't try and take it on yourself. Ask for help. Okay, let's go to the next slide. These are some of our suggestions too, and you've probably experienced lots of these on your own over the last couple of years as well. So we find that it's really helpful, especially for bigger meetings, to do a full test run where you test your Zoom link, you test your screen sharing. So you'll see that we're screen sharing from Google Slides. That's our favorite for slideshows because it's online. You can share the link rather than having to open PowerPoint on our computers. So we use Google Slides a lot. In your test run, you can test out live streaming. So we're here in Zoom right now, but a lot of our community members are probably on Facebook, right? Or at least in my nation, most people are on Facebook, and lots of those folks are hesitant to join into a Zoom meeting. They just don't know how it works. And so we always, if we're going to do a Zoom meeting, also live stream it on Facebook at the same time. And not only do we live stream it, we also make sure that someone's watching the comments in Facebook and then copy and pasting them into the Zoom chat so that when I'm facilitating the meeting, I can see people's comments and questions from Facebook, even though I can't see them because I'm in Zoom. And I would say in my community, we get about half of our participants in Zoom, but about half on Facebook. And so we double our numbers when we do that live streaming. But it can be a little tricky and the technology changes. So doing a test run helps a lot with that. And then just making sure everyone has the right link and stuff. Another tip is just to keep notes of attendees' names in order as they join the meeting. So after the meeting, you have a good record, even if folks drop out partway through. So you could use a Google document for that and share that with other folks that are supports. Offering different ways for participants to ask questions. So we find that some folks are really comfortable posting a question or comment in Zoom chat, like many of you today. Other folks don't really know how to do that, or maybe they're joining Zoom on their phone or on an iPad, and it's really tricky for them to type. And so, so we will often say, when we get to a Q&A period, we'll say you can either type a comment into Zoom chat, unmute yourself and just jump in and speak. You can raise your hand like this or use the Zoom reaction like I'm going to do right now to raise your hand. So any of those 4 things will let us know you want to speak and give you time on the speakers list. So we don't force people to use just one way of asking questions. Another thing that's really nice, especially for smaller groups, is welcoming people by name as they enter. It's really kind of like weird and formal to come into a Zoom room that's in progress, right? It's kind of like coming into a big hall, like, and you're standing at the back wall and you're like, do they even see me? Do I belong here? What's going on? I came in the middle of this conversation. And so when you see new people join partway through, welcoming them either in chat or verbally can be a really nice way to let them know that they're welcome. We also like to paraphrase and mirror. So when people share comments on Zoom, just to let them know we heard them by repeating it back. And then sometimes for virtual engagement, we just need to take a little extra time between questions or to give people time to share their thoughts before we move on. Let's go. We have just a couple more slides here. And then, like I said, I'll go to the questions and then breakout groups. Next slide. So as many of your questions indicate in the chat, Zoom can feel really inaccessible to people. It's really a useful tool, but we always need to be thinking about not only the people who have an easy time with these tools, but the people that are getting left out. And so, and you also asked about technology. And so some other things that are really helpful are if you're going to do a Zoom meeting, making sure you share the phone number so that people who are more comfortable just phoning in, just audio only, can do that. They have a phone number to call in, whether they have internet or not. Also, just recognizing that for some people, using video makes Zoom feel really scary for them for a number of different reasons. You know, in a lot of our communities, people might not have enough internet to share their video without their computer glitching. B, they might feel really awkward seeing their own face on screen. We know that for a lot of community members, there can be a lot of shame for different reasons, intergenerational trauma. And so for some people, being confronted with their own image just feels really icky and doesn't make them want to participate. For other people, they're feeling really uncomfortable about their home, you know, what's going on in the background, folks running around or whatever. And so they don't want to share their video because they don't want people to see into their homes. And then number 4, some people have really valid legal reasons why they don't want their image to be shared, right? Maybe they don't want photographs taken of themselves. Maybe they've dealt with the legal system before and they're really wary of having, or they're worried about privacy, all really valid reasons. And so I know that it's really nice when people share their video and you can see their facial reactions and feel like you're connecting. But I think it's really helpful also to remember that there's a variety of reasons why people might feel more comfortable just listening or just sharing their voice and not their video. And so making sure that the community knows that's okay. You don't have to share your video, just your voice is fine, or just listening is fine. Makes it easier for people to feel comfortable joining in. Also showing people how to do the virtual background like this can soothe people's fears about their homes showing. And also just like recognizing that people have kids, people have pets, people are going to be eating on Zoom. It's okay. It doesn't have to be super formal. At the same time, at the end of the day, not everyone is going to take part in a Zoom meeting or even watch a Facebook live stream. And so we can try and weave all these things in. But lately, what we've been doing is complementing our Zoom meetings with one-on-one phone calls, especially to elders. So we're saying, okay, hopefully we get good groups together in these Zoom meetings and on Facebook watching at the same time. But we're also going to put a poster out in the community that says, if you want to take part in the CCP, you can either get a group of your family together in your home if you're all in the bubble, or we'll come sit on your porch with a mask on or distance and chat with you, or call you up at whatever time works for you and just hear your thoughts, your vision and goals to weave that into the CCP. So Zoom, Facebook, offering phone calls to people that are just not going to come online to Zoom. And then maybe another tool that we're using pretty often is online questionnaires. So for people that can't make the time to join a virtual meeting and don't really want to do a phone call, having a short virtual questionnaire that you share on Facebook, on the website, or in the meetings might give people a chance to share their thoughts on their own time. And then you can also do paper copies in the community and bring the results together. So I think, just as always, like finding as many different tools as possible. Very briefly, presentation tools are really helpful. So in Zoom meetings, we want to give people stuff to look at and information to take home. And so, like I said, we use Google Slides a lot. We put our presentations together in Google Slides, so they're really easy to screen share. We also use Google Documents to make activity sheets or worksheets that people can use. We can share the link in the Zoom chat, and then you could go into a Google document and everyone can be adding to it at the same time. It's probably the easiest tool to use for collaboration. We also really like Miro, which is like a virtual whiteboard. Yeah, Candace has said Jamboard works too. Even Zoom Annotate, there's a bunch of different visual tools. My advice would be to think about the level of technical knowledge in the group that you're meeting with and use the simplest tool you can. But if you have a group that's really techie, then some of the more complicated tools can be really fun. Of course, we also have polls in Zoom and different things we can do to put questions out to groups, especially big groups where people aren't weighing in much. And so maybe there was a question earlier about how to engage people who just aren't speaking. And I think often giving them chances to share in ways that don't require them to speak are helpful. So my big recommendation there would be polls or questionnaires, or like a Google Doc or Post-its in Miro where they can share their thoughts without speaking, without unmuting themselves. We can stop screen sharing for a minute. I want to spend like a couple minutes just picking off some more questions from chat, and then we're going to go to breakouts in a moment. And so forgive me, I'm just going back to see. Oh yeah, so difficult to get people to engage or turn cameras on from Linda. Yeah, I think just recognizing that there are different reasons for that. And maybe just having a couple brief moments where you invite people to turn their camera on, maybe just to check in and let them know that they're welcome. If they don't mind turning it on just for that moment, so you could see who's there, and then turning it off, but in the end, leaving it up to people. Communities that are rural, remote, yeah. So again, using Zoom, letting people phone in if they need to, Facebook live streaming, recording the video in case they need to watch later when they have a better signal, but also at the end of the day, recognizing that virtual engagement just isn't always going to reach everyone in the community. So having those phone calls, having paper copies of things for those folks who just, that's how they connect and stay engaged. The more tools you use, the better. I'm going to go on encouraging people to try online. So one thing we've been talking about a lot, but haven't tried it yet, is asking youth to partner with elders and giving honoraria to them. And so saying, if we've got a virtual meeting, if a youth pairs up with an elder to get them on Zoom and they take part in the meeting together, giving honoraria to both of them to thank them for working together. We're excited to try that because for a number of reasons. So building those relationships between the generations, giving time for people to spend together if they're in the same bubble. You know, we're presuming that if they're family, like that you would pick someone who you're okay being in the room with. So it prevents staff from having to be in close contact with people if it's their own family. And then just building the elders or the folks who can't get online, building their confidence with the tools and empowering youth, right? Really celebrating youth for these skills that they have in this virtual world. So that's I think that's our best option. We tried doing Zoom workshops in community where we said, come take this Zoom workshop and we'll teach you how to use Zoom. And we've done a couple of them and no one ever shows up or phones in or asks for that support. So I think like sending people out to homes is going to be the best option. Virtual portals. Oh yeah. So this like mural, Jamboard, Miro. Maybe when we come back from the breakouts, I'll show you some of the virtual tools that we use. But sometimes we get questions too, like what's the best option for virtual whiteboard? Is it Miro? Is it Mural? Is it Jamboard? And I would say we like Miro, but they're all good tools. So pick the one that you're the most comfortable with and get really good at it. Learn all the tips and tricks for the one that you like the best. And don't worry about whether it's the absolute best one or not, because they're all good. They're all going to be helpful. And we can get really anxious about using the perfect tool all the time, when really, if we just focused on one tool and learned how to use it well, it would be totally fine. Yeah, getting connected without internet, like Brenda, I would say, you can get boosters that boost a signal in areas where they might not exist before. But some of that can get so complicated if you're trying to reach the whole community. So again, I would just find tools aside from virtual engagement to reach people who have bad connectivity, rather than spending a ton of money on technology that might or might not work for people, unless you have specific individuals where for sure that a booster or something's going to support them. But I would invite thoughts from other people and hope you talk about that in your breakouts. Yeah, and Brenda's just saying her home feels funny. Yeah, and so making it safe for people to participate without sharing their home. Oh yeah, and Candace has just shared a really good suggestion: purchasing tablets. Although I will say, in my community, we offered to send tablets out to people that didn't have computers at home. And again, no one took us up on the offer, but I think that's a really nice option too. And maybe, again, if you had youth or tech savvy people pairing up with folks who needed the help, if you gave them tablets, and maybe you have roles in the community of youth who have the tablets. It's a gift from the CCP, but they have to go help elders connect or help people connect in meetings. Things like that could be fun. So now is the time for you to put your heads together and think about some of your own ideas about what can make virtual engagement feel really good. So we are going to go to breakout rooms and we have a question for you. So maybe, Ren, if you want to screen share again. And so our big question for you to talk about in the breakout groups is, what can you do in virtual engagement to make people feel welcome, valued, and comfortable? What can you do to make people feel welcome, valued, and comfortable in virtual engagement? And so maybe I'll hand it over to our lovely tech host to let us know how much time do we have in the breakout groups and any other instructions. After your breakouts, we're going to come back together, share some highlights. And if you've got other questions for me, we can go through them at that time. So how's our timing looking, Kate?
We're doing great. Thank you so much, Jessie. And thanks everyone for being here. We are going to move into breakout rooms now. Just before we do, I just want to thank anyone who's watching this recording after the fact. Thank you for spending almost an hour with us. We hope you learned some fun tidbits, and we will be distributing the slide presentation as well. So thank you so much for watching this recording. Ren and Felicia, I'll ask that you stop recording now.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah.